Well, I think last but not least, before we get to the important part, which is you, is Elmer Rudolph with the Sapperton Fish and Game Club. Now, Elmer is active in his community too, in his resident association, but tonight he's here representing the Sapperton Fish and Game Club. He's been a member of the club since 1984 and has been a conservationist, keen conservationist ever since. He joined the club just about the time that salmon came back into the Brunette River after a 30-year absence back in 1969. He took over the position of director of the Brunette River Restoration Project in the 1990s, and I think you saw him on the front cover of the newspaper last week in his hip waders out doing some work. He's out there quite a bit. He's lived in New Westminster for 65 years and is currently president of the Sapperton Fish and Game Club. Please welcome Elmer Rudolph.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone. And yes, I am a member of the Sapperton Fish and Game Club, which have been the stewards of the Brunette River since 1969. Long time, going back 45 years. For those of you who may not know a great deal about it, approximately half the length of the Brunette River flows exclusively through Burnaby, approximately 1/4 through a shared boundary between New Westminster and Coquitlam, and the final quarter through New Westminster exclusively. The Brunette River empties Burnaby Lake, flows approximately 6 kilometers to the east, and empties into the Fraser River in New Westminster near the Royal Columbian Hospital in Sapperton. For a small river, it has quite a large watershed, beginning up on the top of Burnaby Mountain at the SFU campus, moving west to North Burnaby and the Brentwood area, into East Vancouver, around to Central Park, Metrotown, and back to New Westminster along the Kingsway Ridge. The history of the Brunette River over the last 100 years is like the ride of a roller coaster, a way up, a way down, and all points in between. At the top of the roller coaster, in 1900, the Brunette River was one of the best small rivers in the Lower Mainland for salmon. As a matter of fact, you can find stories in the local newspapers going back to that time about the abundance of salmon seen in the river. At that time, coho salmon, chum salmon, and pink salmon were the historic species. By the 1930s, the Brunette River still had good numbers of salmon, but by the late 1940s, it was in trouble. The trouble began in the Still Creek area north of Burnaby Lake, which is the main spawning area for the river. Post-Second World War industrial development began to see the deposit of heavy metals, the byproducts of industrial processes, along with other chemical pollutants, into Still Creek. So that stressed the spawning salmon when they were coming back to their spawning beds. At the same time, at the bottom end of the river in New Westminster, the lower Brunette industrial area had been polluting the river for decades via outfall pipes disgorging all manner of liquids 24 hours a day directly into the river. That was the double whammy: pollution in the spawning beds at the top end and pollution in the lower river that the salmon had to swim through to get to the cleaner water. The result was that by 1955, the coho salmon return to the river was 0. We had hit the bottom of the ride. For 14 years, little changed. But in 1969, the Sapperton Fish and Game Club members took it upon themselves to attempt to restore the river to some semblance of what they had known and remembered about it as kids 30 years earlier when they had swam and fished and played in it. But when they approached governments to help them, much to their surprise, they were virtually rebuffed by every level of government, federal, provincial, and even local governments. And industries along the river were also not very cooperative, understandably, because to change their processes was going to cost them a lot of money. They weren't about to do us any favors because nobody had made them do it. And you have to appreciate in 1969, unlike today, terms like ecology, environmental degradation, salmon habitat, habitat destruction, those terms were virtually unknown in the language. Nobody used them, unlike today when they're common. So the Sapperton Fish and Game Club essentially had to go it alone with little or no help, doing what they could to clean it up. And the only advice we received from the experts was that it was a hopeless task. It could not be done. And as a matter of fact, they quoted us chapter and verse as to how it couldn't be done, why it couldn't be done. Then in the mid-1970s, we were rescued by a knight on a white charger in the form of the federal government, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which had become alarmed at the sharp reduction in the number of coho salmon returning to their traditional spawning rivers on the south coast of British Columbia, particularly the Fraser River. So they created the Salmonid Enhancement Program, known as SEP, whose aim was to recover coho salmon spawning streams, especially those tributary to the Fraser River. The thrust of the program was to help community groups who were interested in their local streams. The community groups would provide the grunt work, and DFO would provide the technical expertise. The Brunette River was a prime candidate, therefore, due to its previous history and its current sad state, and the Sapperton Fish and Game Club's lonely but well-publicized efforts to restore it. So that was the turning point, the mid-1970s. For the Department of Fisheries and Oceans brought along with it the enforcement muscle in the form of the Fisheries Act, which nobody had ever bothered enforcing before. And one of the key parts of the Fisheries Act made it an offense to discharge deleterious substances into fish-bearing waters. And they used that like a club. The Lower Brunette industrial area polluters were brought to heel, and by 1980, for about 5 years later, the Lower Brunette water quality would support fish life. Juvenile salmonids were planted into the Brunette in 1980, and we received our first adult coho back to the river in 1984. And they have returned every year since then. The experts who had poo-pooed us 15 years earlier now expressed their amazement and said, "How did you do it?" Well, unlike today, when anyone can acquire reams of info on just how to do it, we had no book, no manual. We made it up as we went along, and we just used our common sense. One thing we all learned from the experience was that if the Brunette River, a river wholly contained within a metropolitan area with no real source of clean water, could be brought back, then virtually any river in North America could do the same. And as a matter of fact, we received phone calls from all across North America with the same question: how did you do it? And we simply, over and over again, told our story. Speaking of stories, to shorten a long one, since 1999 and the rebirth of the Brunette River, the Sapperton Fish and Game Club, working with Metro Vancouver, which you might have known previously as the GVRD, and the provincial government, have spent about $1 million to improve the Brunette for salmon, steelhead, and cutthroat trout, all historic Brunette River species. No, the Sapperton Fish and Game Club did not spend a large chunk of that $1 million, but we did spend approximately $50,000 of our own money. And we are continuing work on the river to this day. It's still not done. There's still lots to do. The autumns of 2012 and 2013 saw the largest salmon returns in recent history to the Brunette River, approximately 2,800 coho, chum, and pink salmon each of those 2 years. As a matter of fact, spawning salmon returned in tiny streams, only 1 or 2 meters wide, where they had never been seen before, primarily in Burnaby and around the Burnaby Lake area. much to the delight of hundreds of people who reported to us seeing them. So we now have a valuable community resource, and we are understandably very protective of it. We don't want to lose it again. Which brings us to the proposal by Kinder Morgan to route a new pipeline from Alberta through BC, Coquitlam and Burnaby to their facility on Burnaby Mountain. Their proposed route brings it parallel to the Brunette River, as some speakers have said before me, within a distance varying from 50 meters to 200 meters over a 4-kilometer length. During that 4-kilometer length, where it parallels the river, it would cross 4 or 5 streams, which are all tributary to the Brunette. Any spill near those streams would be potentially catastrophic for the river. Even if it didn't directly impact a stream, a spill could still leach into the river's aquifer, given the proximity of the pipeline to the river. Needless to say, we are very concerned about the pipeline's construction integrity and its safety. The Sapperton Fish and Game Club knows what it is to lose a river and the time and the effort it takes to bring it back. And we don't want it to happen again to the Brunette. In conclusion, the Brunette River has been transformed from a very sorry state 45 years ago into a very valuable asset today in our community. And we are all very concerned for its future well-being. Thank you.